Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope everyone is having a good day. My name is Jasmine. I'm a practicing witch. We talk about that here on the internet. I'm streaming, coming at you live and in full color. Okay, hello. I do have a storm rolling in, so my internet connection might be kind of odd at different points of the stream. And I'm also streaming really early, probably the earliest stream I have ever streamed here on my channel. Okay, I have a lovely guest with me today, so I will allow you to introduce yourself. I'm so happy that you're here, darling.
Hi, I'm Troll Huldren. I'm an animist witch and initiate of the Faerie tradition. I've been practicing witchcraft for like 25 years now. I've been initiate now for just past my 18th year as an initiate of Faerie. And
just a spring chicken. A real spring chicken.
Yeah, well, I was a very young student. I started in traditional witchcraft at 18 and was initiated at 25. So I've been in it kind of my whole adult life. And I'm definitely a lifer and someone who my life is all about the craft.
That's amazing. I always feel like, I started really getting into traditional witchcraft in like my early to mid 20s. And she's in her 30s now, but I mean, I feel very similar to that as well, in the sense that like I feel like I live and eat and breathe and shit witchcraft. Like It's a lifeblood for sure. Well, I'm honored to have you on. I do have kind of like some questions that I've like curated for us to talk about, but I do want to tell the chat, like, if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them down below. And I will try to go back and get to everyone's questions if you do have questions. Also, we're doing like this fun poll thing on the channel that I've discovered with lives. You can make these goals. So if you want me to have Troll back on, which I probably will regardless of what you guys do with the vote, you have to send like a cute little sticker. So there's a goal for that. All right, let's get into these questions. So we kind of talked about introductions. Okay, so let's talk about Faerie.
Yeah, so Faerie it's an initiatory mystery tradition. I think of it as an American traditional witchcraft, not the American traditional witchcraft, but an American traditional witchcraft that was really propagated by Victor and Cora Anderson out of California and their initiate Gwydion Penderwen. And Victor was initiated into something called like the Harpy Coven in Oregon in the 30s.
Okay, I thought this was like West Coast vibes.
Yeah. And he was a remarkably strange little man. I never met him in this lifetime. He died right as I was coming on as a student in the Faerie tradition. But I did meet Cora, and I was close with her, and I actually helped take care of her at the end of her life for a while. I would visit her usually a couple times a week because she was bedridden at the end of her life. But yeah, Faerie, it's a strange tradition that comes out of sort of the West Coast of the United States. It's contagious in the sense that everything that Faerie sort of comes in contact with, it sort of takes something from it, or it leaves an imprint on the tradition in a way. Lots of people in the trad have been involved in a lot of African diasporic traditions and religions. So those things have left their imprint through the practitioners that have been a part of the tradition. Tradition is all about the people, and there have been lots of Faerie initiates over the last, 60, 70 years.
Can you clarify how we're spelling this and like the spelling variations? Because I'm like we were talking about before we started, I'm kind of familiar with like the Feri. But in your bio, and also everyone, I have linked their YouTube platform down below. So after the stream, please go check out Troll's channel because there's really good stuff over at Hillbilly Higgit. Okay. But in your YouTube bio, I see that there's two spellings. So can we talk about that?
Yeah. So In 2011, the tradition split. There was a group of initiates who didn't like kind of where some of the tradition was headed, and instead of fighting with other initiates endlessly, we decided to just divorce. So we sort of took our virtue, our portion of the virtue, and sort of created a little firewall and sort of moved along. And we kind of call ourselves like Old Faerie, or we went back to earlier spellings of the tradition. The Andersons really started spelling it Feri in the 90s. When Cora wrote a book called 50 Years in the Faerie Tradition, which was her 50th wedding anniversary present to Victor. And it sort of took hold after that. But when my
I don't want to interrupt you, but I just need to say this because I will lose it if I don't. I saw, I think, a 50th wedding anniversary video on YouTube. Is that correct? Is that what that is? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. It's very cute. They were very cute people. I adore them. I adore Victor and Cora in death and the way they showed up in life. They were great people. Where was I? What was I saying?
Oh God. Two neurodivergent queers walk into a live stream. We were talking about the Faerie tradition, the 50th wedding anniversary.
Oh yeah. So the spelling. So when my teacher came into Faerie, it was spelled Faery or Faerie, and I've even seen it spelled Fairy. Like it's just an aesthetic choice, essentially. My spelling it Faery is just a way to honor my teacher Gabriel Carrillo, who passed away in 2005. And I wasn't actually initiated by that man. His oath sister was the person who is my oath mother. She's my initiator in the tradition.
Okay. So is it just aesthetics, or is there any like meaning behind like the way that the letters are arranged? Or
I think that it's about aesthetics, although there are some like kind of in jokes or inside information about like assigning meaning to it spelled Feri. Like Victor said that Feri means like royal iron.
Oh, okay.
Because he was pointing out the Fe as in like Ferris, and the Ri sort of relating it to sort of Celtic languages around kingship and royalty, Ri. But a lot of those are sort of mythopoetic ways of encountering the word. They aren't sort of necessarily adamant truths.
So this is kind of, I feel like, a big question that I think you're going to answer in general, kind of across this whole live stream. So don't feel like you have to like make a one-word answer to simplify this, because I don't think there is a simple answer. But Sorceress is asking, what exactly is a Faerie initiate?
Okay, so a Faerie initiate is somebody who has gone through the rites of initiation in the Faerie tradition, which is like a ritual where a Faerie initiate or a set of Faerie initiates bring you through a set of rites, and during that rite, you're conferred upon the virtue of the tradition and certain secrets of the tradition, and thereafter you are a carrier of that current.
And like, what makes a Faerie initiate is that they're Faerie. Like, period. We were talking about before we started the stream, y'all, about how much in common we have and how many similarities we have with like terminology and our views on cosmology, and how there's these different elements that make up traditional witchcraft and how our paths are uniquely different but related at the same time. So what is traditional witchcraft to you?
So I gave you a couple of quotes that I often look back towards. So even though Lee Morgan's not a Faerie initiate, he has his own tradition. There are so many commonalities between the Faerie tradition and the Andrean tradition that I think of them as like cousins. And Lee has a remarkable ability to like put things into words in ways that really get at your guts. And so I often go back to things that he has said that like hit me in the guts. And these two quotes are those things that I keep going back to over and over again. So that this first one talks about how traditional witchcraft is an art that combines, high and low magic. And he admits that like those terms aren't the greatest terms. And that what really stands out for me here is that mysticism and sorcery are fused in witchcraft, in traditional witchcraft. They're one thing. And that you can't look at them as separate, because traditional witchcraft is a duty. It's a calling by the other world, at least as I see it, to do something in the cosmos. And then the other quote that I gave you really speaks to me as to like what a witch is. And that's the one that talks about how witches, we kind of have these perceptual abilities that are sort of inborn, or they're already present when we come to witchcraft. And he, in his coven, used the term marked. We're people who are marked, and we have an otherness that we embody. And for me, traditional witchcraft, at least the kind that is curated inside of these major initiatory houses, is an experience of an otherworldly culture. I think that's one of the most important parts of traditional witchcraft, is that it brings forth a culture that is distinct and separate from the overculture that we all live in, that I think is very ill and ill-making. And that part of what being in a coven is creating what the Andorians call an oasis, which is a place to heal from this marketplace world where everything is for sale and trade and theft. Inside the oasis of a coven, there is a profundity of experience that like we have an inherent kind of worth and a belonging to each other that is so powerful that it extends beyond one lifetime. A lot of us have a really intense religious belief that we keep coming back to encounter one another in the same times and places through different lifetimes, that we're witches again and again together, so that we can work kinds of magic that take more than one lifetime to accomplish. If you're going to do a piece of magic that takes 10 lifetimes to do, you're going to need the ability to come back together again to do that. I went on too long. Go ahead with
No, not at all. Not at all. And if people have questions kind of throughout the chat, like if it's in the flow of what we're talking about, I might just like deviate from our rough doc and just pull up a viewer question. I think that that's a really good answer, because like I feel like when I think of traditional witchcraft, in theory, it seems like something very straightforward and like not that complicated. Like we don't have to make it complicated, but also like if I were to actually, in my own words, be like, this is what traditional witchcraft is, it's like also, where do I start?
Yeah. You have to have like a whole other framework for encountering the world.
Yeah.
Which is, in some ways I'm really lucky. I grew up in a house where my parents weren't religious, even though I was constantly looking for spiritual connections.
Okay.
And, I found witchcraft at like 13. And so my mind has been reacculturating in a different way since I was like 13 years old. In fact, most of my life has been as a witch rather than someone who didn't identify as a witch. So I'm in this strange, unique position of sort of being outside of the overculture's frameworks about what's real and what's not real. And I, also that's very part and parcel of being queer. Like for a lot of reasons, like queerness drove me to witchcraft, and witchcraft like enhanced and opened up my queerness in profound ways.
Oh, for sure. Me too. I feel like I really got into sort of the archetype and the vibe of the witch, if you will, like in my teen years. And then it really became like more serious, like in my early 20s. Because in my teens, we were doing things like Bloody Mary in the mirror. You know what I mean? Which, by the way, for those of you, I just recently got turned on to American Horror Stories, plural stories, not American Horror Story. American Horror Stories is a bunch of like, there's 3 seasons, and instead of each season being one story, like Coven or Asylum or Freak Show, each episode is a different story. And they did one on Bloody Mary. That's why it's like fresh on my mind right now. And the chick who plays Electra in Pose plays Bloody Mary. It's so vibes. 10 out of 10. People go check it out.
Yeah.
Okay. So
So we talked
Okay.
about Faerie. We've talked about traditional witchcraft in general.
Yeah. So let's talk about threads.
Oh, yeah.
In one of your videos I was watching, because so far I'm up to date, babe. I'm up to date. I'm waiting for more content. Okay.
Word.
But in one of your videos, I heard you talking about the red thread and the white thread. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I encountered these concepts first through the work of Nigel Jackson as like a teenager, like around 1997. And one of his books, I think it was The Call of the Horned Piper. It's the first times I read those two words together, red thread and white thread. But then my magister, Gabriel, was very taken with Nigel Jackson's work. So we discussed those kinds of witcheries together a lot. And so, at least as I understand it, the red thread is the passage of, some people are going to be triggered by this word, but the witch blood from one living witch to another witch. And it is, in some sense, the bloodied white thread. And the white thread is initiation by the spirits. It is, some people call it like midnight's lightning strike, but it is the direct tether we have to the spirit world. And then as living witches, we ruddy it, and we redden it by our sweat and toil and love and lust that anchors it here into the waking world more profoundly, I think. And it is what we pass to one another through our traditions. So the red thread is another way of talking about your lineage, your witch's bloodline. You know, when I say witch blood, I'm not talking about some kind of weird quanta inside of your DNA somehow. I'm talking about the passage of power from one living witch to another living witch.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I'm familiar with what you're talking about, but it's good to have that distinction because people that might fall in line with naughty C stuff are very much not welcome here. And that's not what we're doing. And also, I think a lot of trad witches, at least ones that I keep company with, when we're talking about witch blood, like it is not from a weird witch supremacy eugenics standpoint. We're talking about like our beloved and mighty dead. Mm-hmm. We're talking about the witches who have come before us, be them our ancestors by craft or our ancestors by bone, you know, like, so don't do that. Okay. If you're watching this and you're going there, like, let's not do that because that's not what we're doing here today.
I've also, you know, I've not heard this spoken aloud a lot in online spaces, but there is another meaning to witch blood that I'm familiar with that I use in my practice. So witch blood is also a substance that we produce to feed our familiar spirits. So like we talk about it existing, like if you have contact with the witch fire, the current of magic, mm-hmm. then your body's going to produce witch blood as a witch. So it's going to be present in your sexual fluids, in your tears, in your saliva, and your sweat. And we can use those as materia magica to feed our familiar spirits.
Tea. Absolute tea. So do you have a black thread in your tradition?
We don't talk about a black thread, even though we use that sort of real familiar 3 or 4 color system, red, white, black, when we add green or glass to it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, in our tradition, like the red, white, and the black is like a really reoccurring sort of trinity. And like there are other colors that have meanings and associations too. I think green also is like fairly common. This kind of takes us into one of our next talking points really well, I think, which was about the witch gods, because I also was watching one of your videos and I found this really interesting because when I look at other like sort of like trad craft groups, and it's just delightful because it's like terminology that I recognize that sometimes might be used in a slightly different way, but we're still speaking the same language, maybe just a different dialect, you know, like, so talk about the witch gods through this tradition's lens.
So in the Faerie tradition, you know, when I was coming up as an apprentice in the Faerie, I was an apprentice for 7 years. And at one point I moved to the West Coast to continue my apprenticeship. And I kept hearing people compare the fairy tradition to Wicca mostly. And so a lot of the frameworks were sort of in that like fairy versus Wicca. And it wasn't until I encountered like some other versions of traditional witchcraft that I realized, oh my gosh, when we compare ourselves to these other traditions, we have way more in common with them framework wise than we do with like Wicca and sort of neo-pagan witchcraft.
And I will say too, not to cut you off, but I will say too, because I've said this before, I think like it's kind of really vogue to like shit on Wicca right now and like bully the Wiccans. Like it's kind of trendy, it's kind of vogue. I'm also not here for that. No. Yeah. And like I feel that actually, and speaking for myself, not speaking for our coven or our entire tradition, I'm speaking for Jasmyne right now. But I have found that I actually have a lot more in common with like Gardnerians and Alexandrians.
Yes.
Than I would your run-of-the-mill eclectic witch or your run-of-the-mill neo-pagan. So yeah, anyway, continue. I just had
to... So in that, I sort of started to understand sort of the shape of things. And after I was initiated in Faerie, I went on to study with Peter Pagan in the For the When tradition that he was beginning to teach online for a while before he passed away. And I studied with him, and I was like, oh my gosh, there are so many parallels. And so starting to frame these gods that I kind of see again and again across multiple initiatory traditions. But within Faerie, I'll just talk about them as I see them in my tradition and how I work with them. So the first one I'm going to mention is what we call in Faerie the star goddess. But I often call her Old Fate or the Weaver or the Binder. And she is this, she's the whole cosmos created and uncreated. We begin and end all of our magic with sort of her acknowledging her presence. She's the ground of being. I know that in some other forms of modern craft, you hear her talked about as like ancient providence. Hulda, or Hecate. Some people call her Hecate, exactly. And in Faerie, we often use the name Quaquaralina for her, which is a word that sort of Victor got from the spirit world. Victor has a lot of words that we inherited from the spirit world directly that are the names of gods, or we often use fiction as a way to name sort of outwardly our deities, because I think fiction is a great way to encounter the liminal.
I do too.
Yeah. So, for instance, the names of the witch mother that we use the most are Nimue, Mari, and Anna. And we see the witch mother as like this three-faced, sometimes four-faced being. And those are sort of the three front-facing, the crescent and full moons of her face. The Faerie tradition has, because it's been around a while, it's got a lot of spirits attached to it, not just these four. And it's almost like these four beings appear again and again in different times and places because they're almost like families of entities. There's a concept in Santeria that I'm really familiar with called like the roads of an Orisha. So it's a way of talking about like almost like a retinue of beings that are sort of all named after sort of the head of the family and all act as and on behalf of that being. In the tradition that I practice, we call that a magistellus, which means like little master. And so like when a coven encounters one of these four witch gods, we kind of have this idea that we're not necessarily dealing with the master or the witch mother. We're dealing with the local master or the local witch mother, who is just as good as the master, if there even is one.
Yeah, I feel like I resonate with that as well, in the sense that when I look at the Weaver, or I look at like our Mother in Darkness, our Great Weaver, who we all come from, who we all return to, I very much think of our tradition's name Colio, which is like our name of the Black goddess. But I agree, and I really resonate with that as well, in the sense that like our witch gods have worn other faces too. And yeah, the two that I think of the most commonly would definitely probably be Hulda, Hecate, maybe Caradwen, you know, some of that vibes.
She's often, associated with the cauldron, the cauldron as the cosmos itself that brings everything forth into being. In fact, our opening prayer in the fairy tradition is, Holy Mother, in whom we live, move, and have our being. From you all things emerge, and unto you all things return. That's like a sung prayer that we do everything we open with that way, sort of acknowledging that she is the matrix and ground of being, and everything is sort of built of and upon her back. And then I mentioned the witch mother. So I think of the witch mother as like the daughter self of Old Fate. She, there's this idea that comes from the anthropologist Carl Karenyi, who was a writer in the earlier part of the 20th century. And he has a book called like The Gods of the Greeks, but he also has a book on Demeter and Persephone. He kind of coined this term, the daughter self, when he was talking about Persephone being the daughter self of Demeter. That's very much how I see the witch mother, as being the daughter self of Old Fate. She kind of embodies all the powers of her parent, but in this sort of mutated guise in a way. She's whereas like the star goddess likes to bind things and wrap things up, the witch mother likes to unknot things. It's like a mirror version of her daughter self. She's an unbinder of things. She's very much connected to love and sexuality and springtime and the arising of power. But she's also a teacher of like all the mysteries of not just sex, but death. So like there's this interesting dynamic that she is the powers of sex and the powers of death sort of in one being.
See.
I love her. Yeah. And then we have the master, who in the fairy tradition we call Jenna Glass, or sometimes we call him Melek Taus. The peacock angel. We have lots of different names for him and different guises that he appears as. And he's kind of mysterious and strange, and he's in between everything. But he's also embodied in our own human divinity. That's how I would describe him. Is he embodies our human divinity in a way that is revelatory.
And I think you kind of paralleled him with who you call Old Fate in the video that I saw. I think like there were, because you were kind of drawing some comparisons between the four, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So say your question one more time. I misunderstood you.
Oh, I was just thinking of like the master and like Old Fate, and like how I thought, if I remember correctly, in the video I watched, you were kind of pairing those two, and then the fourth with the witch mother.
Yes. So yeah, and that is something that's interesting about Faerie, is that we tend to have this interesting pairing of the master and Old Fate together as almost like divine twins in a sense. And then we have the witch mother and this other being that I'm going to talk about, who I call the Eld God, or the Old One, who appears to us as divine twins. He's got kind of a bright face and a dark face. Or you can kind of think of him as two spirits that were perfected into one.
And I feel like these twins and this like these imageries of like duality is so pervasive throughout a lot of different tradcraft groups.
That's you have like twins, but they're always changing places. So like nothing is ever staying still. It reminds me of that quote from the Cochrane letter, where Robert Cochrane asks someone like, what are the two words not spoken from the cauldron? And his answer in response was, be still. That everything in the universe is constantly in motion, and that the only thing that doesn't exist is absolute stillness. So these twins are constantly in motion. They're constantly becoming one another, which I think is part and parcel to what witchcraft is we're always, as witches, changing our faces. We're always transforming ourselves through the trials and tribulations of living a life.
And I feel like it's kind of also part of why I think so many queer folks have this innate drive or call to the witcheries, because there's such like a queer nature to our mythos. Like it's just so baked in. And I think it's really cool, like, to see nowadays more queer people in these trans spaces. Like, that's what I'm here for. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky that Faerie, Victor Anderson didn't have the language to describe himself as non-binary, but he had his own word for it. He called himself a thorn person, which essentially meant that he didn't think of himself as a man. He was non-binary, and he was also openly bisexual and had relationships with men when he was younger. So I was lucky to be in a tradition that was sort of propagated by someone who was openly queer, even before there was language around it. And it's baked into our tradition. Like around midsummer, we actually celebrate the midsummer seasonal feast as a feast of the red man and the green man as like brother lovers. Or sometimes we see them as sister lovers. But
I'll be waiting on my invitation.
Yeah, it's definitely like a queer relationship that we celebrate at midsummer.
I'm RSVPing right now. That's next week.
Yeah, right. And and that feast is very much about how all the things that are red, that bleed red blood, are eaten and consumed in this. We think of it, this death as like a sexual consummation or consumption, and then the red things eat the green things, and it's this cycle that is endless. And
that's how like our duality again, like another message of this duality and these partnerships and
duality without purity. Everything is constantly becoming something else because it's interacting and consuming. I think of, we have this story in our coven about how the witch father, the master, when he fell, he gave up his true name, except for one syllable. And that giving up his true name meant that he was giving up being bound to any one form so that he could become everything. And we have this idea that he is all light and motion, and that therefore he is all electrons. And it's kind of, it's a story about unbinding yourself so that you can encounter your limitlessness. The master transformed through all of the spirit courts. We recognize, we kind of have this non-hierarchical spirit taxonomy that we call the 4 spirit courts, that are colored red, white, black, and glass. And we assign spirits to those 4 colors. And he transformed through all of them, sort of becoming everything 7 times. And so that's a way of talking about coming into your own mastery, your own immortal form.
I love that. Sorry, guys. I just got this notification that my laptop is on energy saver mode because I forgot to bring my charger in here. So I'm going to be right back. I'm going to put you up on the screen for you to entertain the kids while I'm gone.
Okay.
Give me like 2 seconds. We have this question from earlier that I want to make sure we get to. So I'm going to put this up on the screen. I'm going to put you on. I'm going to go grab my charger. I will be right back. Can you see it?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. I'll be right back.
The thing takes multiple lifetimes. How do you recognize someone you have worked with before? Just wondering. Okay. So we often dream of each other. In the same way that you recognize someone that you love, it's a sense in your, what I would call your fetch, in your guts, in your the cauldron of your hips will tell you, like, I have this profound connection with someone. I remember one of my elders, Brian Dragon, who passed away some years ago, telling me that when he was first coming up in the fairy tradition in the 70s, that the way they talked about sort of recognizing each other was through the modes of sexual attraction and like falling in love with someone, like that romantic feeling as being the tether that sort of tells you that you want to be connected to these people, or that you are connected to these people. And then, it's backed up by divinations. It's backed up by the fact that we have dreams about these people, and that we just have this instinctive recognition, like, oh, your dream body looks different your flesh body does, but I know you. And that's happened several times for me. It's profound. You can't deny that it's happening.
Yeah. I don't even know if I have anything to add to that, because like, when you know that someone is part of your magical blood or your magic kin, you just know.
Yeah.
Like, it's a knowing.
Yeah.
And it's there or it's not.
Yeah.
And I've definitely been on the side too of like making it there when it's really not there. And if it's not there, it's just not there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't, there's no passing that. There's no giving that. There's no making that.
Yeah.
I'm out of breath from running to go get my charger, y'all. When I think about like witches being born or made, like witches being born through our blood. But when I think of made, I think of like initiation. But even then, like, there's not like a spell that you're going to do that's going to turn somebody into a witch. Like, this is not Vampire Diaries.
I think Cochrane gave us the whole formula when he said that, everyone quotes a witch is born and not made.
Yeah.
But like the whole quote is a witch is born and not made. Or if one is to be made, then tears must be spilt before the moon can be drawn. And that means you have to go through trauma. It is trauma and ordeals that craft an ordinary human soul into the soul of a witch. Because
initiation.
Initiation by the spirits is a traumatic experience.
Yeah, by blood and tears and bone.
Exactly.
Yes. Love.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this question too that I want to make sure that we get to as well. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. So how does UPG fit into this tradition, say American traditional folkloric witchcraft? So I'll let you go first. We kind of talked about UPG with pop culture a little bit, but
I don't like the term UPG because to me, as a witch who works directly with spirits a lot, and who, I'm someone who's plagued by spirit contact. So I try to, live a life where I try to shut a lot of that out in my day-to-day so I'm not overwhelmed by it. UPG is just being a witch, right? You have spirit contact and you learn things from spirits. And whether someone else outside of you verifies that or not, like, it doesn't matter to me. I really am very much of the opinion that other people's opinions of me are none of my business.
Hello.
So verifying my spirit contact, I only have to verify it with myself and my familiar spirits, the spirits that I know won't lie to me. If I ever get something that like seems fishy, I'll use divination. I'll talk with my fetch mate or some of my other mighty dead and like get the deeds on that. But like, who cares what other witches might think? This isn't about them, right? Unless they're in your coven, and then you're all in it together.
And then that's shared gnosis. That's not even, that's not even UPG at that point.
Yeah. I have to wonder, like, this term, how do people use it? Like, I have worked in lots of covens and groups and with other initiates where we do possession a lot. We let deities and spirits ride us. Exactly. And so
literally
you're going to get
Apollyon, very Dionysian.
Yeah, you're going to get communication.
Yeah. And I think the UPG, to me, it appears to be like more common terminology wise in like pagan spaces, specifically within like Pagan Reconstructionism. And I think like we need to acknowledge more as a magical community that like witch is this over here and pagan is this over here, and sometimes these two things are here together, but they also both still exist here. You know what I mean? And I think how UPG is being used oftentimes is like when people are looking to recreate a practice from a time period in history in a way like with Hellenism, for example. And sure, there are, sources that we can pull on or threads that we can weave with that, certain deities might have more common and more documented attributes, appearances, and inclinations. And if, you know, an orange appears to you as a watermelon, is that really an orange? I'm not really in the business of verifying that for anybody either, though.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
when I think of UPG in the witch world, I think that's just literally our practice to a degree. If you don't have your own gnosis, which would be considered UPG for it to be authentically your own, if you don't have your own gnosis, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Are you just reading out of a book?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's just reading magic.
Yeah. And I've seen that, and that's just not for me.
Not for me either.
I don't try to poo-poo anybody else's practice. I just know what is for me and what's not for me.
Period. Same. Okay. We have this. Go ahead.
Oh, that just made me think of something. When you were talking about, like, you know, gnosis and you know, with regards to, like, Reconstructionism. So it made me think of this Orion Foxwood quote about the witch gods. You know, the witch gods are the gods that made man. If the face of your witch god still has a human face, you haven't reached the witch gods yet. Mm-hmm. This idea that, like, you know, our gods and our spirits kind of ride or possess or wear the faces of some gods from antiquity. I wouldn't say that, like, for instance, I wouldn't say that Old Fate is Hecate.
Right.
But I would say that Hecate is definitely a way that she shows up. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I also have become aware recently that there is not a concept generally in sort of online discourse about the idea of spirits possessing other spirits, which is something that I'm very familiar with. You know, my fetch mate has been ridden by the devil, the master before. I'm very, you know, I think of myself as a spirit, or at least 3 spirits in a trench coat, and I get ridden by other spirits. So of course, if I can be ridden by other spirits, then other spirits can be ridden by other spirits. So there's this concept of, like, endless combinations that are possible when you're dealing with spiritual entities that kind of leaves you boggled and bewildered, and I think it's beautiful and wonderful and awful in the best way.
T.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorceress says, I have a question. How do you develop and work with your personal intuition and psychic insight through specifically your system of practice, being of a Faerie initiate?
Mm-hmm. I was born with some pre-existing perceptual apparatuses in me. Like, you would call it, like, clairaudient and clairtangent. Like, growing up, I heard the dead talk to me, and I felt them touch my body, and it scared the crap out of me as a kid. You know, most nights was me tucked into my bed with my covers up over my nose, like praying that no being spoke my name. So I'm gifted in that sense. Like, spirits, I in my early part of witchcraft training, I went through some rites in the Faerie tradition that are meant to open your sight, your etheric sight. So I am pretty good at seeing things. I'm not always the best at interpreting what I see, because, you know, the spirit world doesn't always speak in reasonable terms. Sometimes it shows you weird, zany, cartoonish stuff, and you have to be like, what was that? But we have a lot of practices around a ritual cleansing. I think that keeping yourself clean ritually and magically is really important, because when you traffic in the spirit world, when you fly into the other world, you're going to attract parasites, just like you would out and about in the living world. You know, so we have, you know, we call it Queerness, or some people use the Hawaiian word kala, to do like ritual cleansing or ritual baths. We do what's called black cloak work, which is a way of creating like a magical egregore that surrounds your physical body / your souls, born out of all of the bound up crap that you internalize from the world. You kind of turn that materia into a magical cloak that protects you. and it helps you fly. And it also increases the likelihood of producing what we call black fire, which is what allows you to have tangible touch experiences in the other world. Lee Morgan taught me about black fire, about how if you feed black fire to your fetchmate's spirit vessel, they can touch you physically. And so I experiment with that, and it's very successful. And black fire is that it's that stuff that gets heated up when the loving parts of yourself encounter the parts of yourself that are stuck inside of you. All the trauma bits that are internalized in your flesh body can be turned into magical materia that allows you to have profound tangential experiences with the spirits.
T. Okay. This is one that I put in here that I'm personally really excited to talk about. Crowning.
Oh, yeah.
I listened to you talk in one of your videos, and you were talking about crowned by white and crowned by black and crowned by green. Let's get into it. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss.
Okay. So I guess we should start with the 4 spirit courts. So I'm going to go back to some teachings from Lee Morgan, from the Andrean tradition, and I've adopted them into our coven because he took something that was already existent in the Faerie tradition, this idea of 4 spirit courts, and he turned them into a story, and he did it in this book, Standing and Not Falling. In there, he turned the courts into dragons or serpents, into these animistic beings that are both inside of us and out in the world, and we can sort of interact with them better that way. It's not just a taxonomy system. It's a way of interacting with spirits now, or interacting with the spiritual forces that are alive in the world as an animist. And so there's this idea that the red and the black serpent are a part of what I call the fetch, which is like our lower cauldron of the hips, our dreaming body, and that the other 2 serpents, the white and the glass, sort of interact with the other 2 souls of us. So we have this interesting like pairing of 2 souls that interact with 2 cauldrons and and 1 cauldron that interacts with these other 2 forces. And there's this idea that these are active everywhere, so that there are these 4 serpents present in sort of everything in creation to various degrees, kind of like a chemical makeup. And that whatever you're strongest in as a witch, that is what you're crowned in. So the forces that are mightiest in me are the black forces, followed by the white. And so I am crowned in the black. That is where my daimonic self, my God soul, or my star self is sort of glorified by those powers, because that's what's strongest inside of me. But the goal is to interact with witches who have complementary forces, so that we're not always out of balance throughout all of our lives. The goal, over many lifetimes, is to move through all of the spirit courts, to be crowned in all of them like the master is, which is why we call him the master, because he is the master of magic, not because he's our master. It's about sort of awakening and mastering these realms of spiritual power. There are virtues associated with each court. The red court is all about connection and love, and also it's the place where the red serpent is only present in beings who have blood. So like my fetchmate, even though he's his own spirit and he has 3 souls, he doesn't have access to the red serpent. But I, as a living witch, the one with the body this time around, I get that special, glorious, precious stuff that is blood, that is the red serpent. And it kind of gives you a little clue into why like spirits find blood so intriguing. It's something that they don't tend to have access to unless they have a flesh body.
Yeah, we have crowning as well. Our crowning is associated with initiatory rites. And I feel like there's a lot of similarities between what you just mentioned as far as like what our strengths are as witches. and like what is on our head. Our crowning is like through initiation, there is a crown bestowed upon your head. Like, who of our gods is claiming you? Even though we work with a trinity, that is also broken up into other spirits as well, because our red god is really 4 gods and 1 god. That's 2 gods, but who's 1 who's also 4 kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm very familiar. Very familiar.
Yeah. So like you're crowned in black, or you're crowned in white, or you're crowned in red would be your witch blood of that particular god that we have, like our parentage, even though we're connected to all 3 of them and we work with all 3 of them. And then there is periods in time where there are jewels within your crown, where for X amount of time you're working with red, or for X amount of time you're working with white. And those choices are kind of decided by our initiatory spirits.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah, but like similar teas, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're all working.
We're playing like with the same blocks. We're just building different things, kind of.
Exactly.
But like I can recognize the blocks.
Exactly. Exactly.
So Chris said this comment. I'm going to read it because I think that this is important for us to touch on. So Chris said, so as it relates to the Faerie tradition and referencing something you mentioned in my previous question about recognizing persons you have worked with before, I understand that there are, here's the second half, a lot of queer persons in multiple traditions. And do you find that the asexual orientation tends to throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in that interaction, or am I missing something? I'm assuming that Chris is referring to the sort of fluid like tap dance that maybe happens at a Sabbath or Esbat or Sabbath between 2 or more, okay, or maybe a little solo dolo. I don't think being asexual would throw any sort of monkey wrench in it, because if you are recognized by the group, then you're recognized by the group, and if the spirits know you, then the spirits know you. And I feel that like we don't need to sleep together for me to know that you're a witch. You know what I mean? Like that's not a problem.
I mean, while I think the Faerie tradition is highly sexual as a tradition, and we even have like sex magic that we teach to each other, and you know, Victor has described orgiastic rites that the Harpy Coven would participate in the 30s. Asexuality, of course, has a place, because my teacher Gabriel said that sex and creativity are the same force running along the same lines of the body for the same purpose. If you can tap into the creative force through whatever method you can, then you can tap into that same thing that we're calling sexuality or sex. It is the same power. And if you're asexual and you can still be creative, you're touching the same stuff that I am, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Period. See. Okay, and I think that also kind of like, and I think we've kind of talked about this throughout this whole stream, but one of the notes I had was, of course, talking about queerness within craft, because one, hello, look at myself and my guest, look at the material. But for 2, it's Pride Month. For 3, we're talking about witchcraft. And so queerness is just so a part of that. Do you have anything to add on to queerness in the craft that we haven't discussed already? I know it's been kind of like a reoccurring current this whole time, but
yeah. I mean, I think my witchcraft is definitely queer in the sense that, you know, I employ shape shifting and flight a lot, and if I'm constantly changing my shape, I'm kind of proving to myself that there is no essential form that I need to occupy, that I can shift and become anything that I can imagine. That's kind of the limit. The limit is my own imagination. And I think that is relevant across the line. You know, I take my craft into all the parts of my life. I don't cut myself up into little boxes. I'm one whole thing. And my witchcraft is about the queerness of the wild, about the in-between things that come from the outside into the hedge of civilization and bend our civilization towards justice and wholeness.
Chris says the sexual attraction being an indicator to having worked together in a past life as an indicator was the meaning. So, Chris, you're saying like we recognize people of our blood based off of how attracted we are to them. Is that because I don't know that that's tea for me personally. I don't know that's tea, but also talking about sex. In our tradition, we definitely have ecstatic rites. We definitely have that sort of tap dance between two or more, or sometimes solo dolo tap dancing, if you're following what I'm saying. There's definitely a place for that. But I would not say that in any sense of the word, like the spiral castle tradition, or I know we kind of trope ourselves as the American traditional folkloric witchcraft, which there's multiple, like we are not the only ones, but we often use that ATW kind of like mirroring BTW. We don't feel, I think most of us would say, I dare to ever speak for a tradition as a whole, but even just for my own coven, like we are not a fertility based anything really. Like we're much more mystery cult focused than we are fertility cult focused. Are there agricultural aspects? Of course, but like our gods, our wheel isn't about our gods consummating. Like the great rite, or even to take it further back with like a Gnostic mass, is not the heart of our practice. Could there be elements for a time or a season where certain things are included in that sort of capacity? Sure, absolutely. But so yeah, all that is to be said. I don't need to want you to think that you're a witch. So
I think he might be referring to me using a story from one of my elders talking about in the 70s, one of the ways that they sort of recognized each other was sort of believing that like their sexual attraction or their romantic attraction to people was part of that remembering who they were together. And as an asexual person, it would be more like, oh, I feel a deep, abiding kinship, like this is my sibling that I'm seeing before.
And I think there's attraction, like attraction to somebody, like a magnetism.
Yes,
would be the word I would probably use. I think sexual attraction could be totally part of it. Witch stuff or just past life stuff, whatever. But I think that like it's almost like when you have those two magnets that are complementary and they attract each other, they magnetize, whatever the word is. I think that's a good way. And also, Chris, like, I don't think you offended either one of us. If you offended me, I'd let you know.
No.
So
I'm very difficult to offend.
Yeah, what were we talking about? Queerness. Okay.
Yeah, queerness. I mean, I think witchcraft is queer. And
period.
You know, my witchcraft is so queer that I've actually, I know that there are witches or practitioners out there who like say that they are AMAB, assigned male at birth, and they would never do a possession with a being that they would call a goddess or a female identified spirit, because for some reason they call that like cross gender possession. That doesn't exist in my tradition.
That doesn't exist in ours either.
Like you can horse anything.
A priest or a priestess or a devil or a dame can call upon and be ridden upon who the writer so chooses, who sees fit. There are times where we might pick a specific saddle in order to ride a specific, with the idea of being ridden in a specific way. But there's also times where you expect for black and here comes white. Like, or red, or, maybe green, or what have you. So, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have on here, and I think this is like my last thing that I put on here, talking about the witch overculture and dialogues around tradcraft in general. I think we're kind of popular now.
I mean,
like, I feel like we're getting kind of popular. Like, I feel like the 90s had their time. The early 2000s had their time. I feel that I'm seeing a lot of witches going back to folkish practices, going back to finding magic, be it witchcraft or other forms of magic, because that's a tea too. Like, let's just call it what it is. Like, not all magic needs to be witchcraft. but people kind of going back to their ancestral roots, digging through their mighty and their beloved dead, looking at folk practices and also trad witchcraft. And maybe it's because of my algorithms and the content that I create, but I really do feel like there's kind of a rise in popularity with books that are coming out right now. And I feel like the trad witch sort of vibe is kind of on this high in this current time, which is wild given the climate right now. And I hope that that's in no way in any relation to the trad wifery stuff. Like if I've seen dialogue about like the more harsh and conservative times get, the more trad vibes kind of permeate. That's another reason why I'm delighted to find more quitches. That's the new word for queer witches.
Yes.
Quitches. I'm delighted to find more queer witches and trad spaces because like I don't want that trad wifery in my trad witchery, you know?
Yeah. I mean,
how do you feel about that?
I think that, I mean, I've watched the patterns go, like, you know, in the early 2000s, like around 2002, 2003, there was
everyone was Celtic. Everyone was Celtic.
And then around 2013, there was another sort of change into what was popular. And like, I'm just seeing these peaks and valleys in popularity. But I think that there is something really real around people flocking to these practices that pull us away from the overculture, the marketplace world of humanity that is making us all sick. At least as I believe, you know, my magister Gabriel would repeat to me over and over again when I was an apprentice, you know, a witchcraft that does not directly challenge and go against the mores and values of mainstream society is no witchcraft. That, you know, we're sort of made from some different stuff. Our culture comes from the other world, from the spirit itself. And so people are looking for something that is not making them feel so sick in their souls, you know. I think culturally we're in a really bad place. You know, people are pretty beat up by this system that we live under, this capitalist system. You know, I think the word marketplace world is really clever because it talks about like this world that we live in where everything is for sale, trade, or theft. Those are the three modes you get to exist in out there, where everything's transactional. And inside the oasis, nothing's transactional. Like everything's relational.
Yeah, and there really is no in between with it. It's like in order to survive, this is
Yeah.
Hunger Games 2025.
Right. And I want something different. Like for me, there's this big promise in witchcraft of creating, you know, paradise on earth within your coven. This place where you nourish and you take care of each other through many lifetimes in this profound, deep way. And to me, that's really beautiful. It is a religious belief, this mutual caring for people over many lifetimes. I think it is something you don't see any analogs of in the overculture.
And I think that the trad witchery, like, for me, it kind of also feels like a rejection of like the trad wifery, like, and a subversion of all of that, and like freedom in that being a subversive like experience, you know?
Yeah, I mean, trad wifery seems like you're trying to get people fitting into certain roles.
Yeah, I don't know what your algorithm is like, but I make trad witch content on TikTok as well, and I don't know if it's the trad word, but the trad wifery and the trad witchery sometimes get meshed together. I've even had like friends of mine who have like, or whatever, viewers or what have you, who like will put on my video or something and like their partner will be like trad wife, and it's like, no, this is trad witch. Like, no, definitely not.
Yeah. You know, there's no trad wifery in my witchcraft as far as I understand it, because, you know, nobody wants to get relegated to one role or get stuck in any one position. You know, that's why, you know.
Well, trad wifery is also, I mean, let's call a spade a spade. It's very much about white evangelical nationalism, which I would say trad witchery is not. No. And folklorically and historically, witches have been and should continue to be today on the side of the resistance. So Get up and get out there, because I don't know what y'all are doing.
Right.
This is what we do as witches. And also, I think that trad wifery really upholds like patriarchy, harsh, rigid gender norms, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, racism, ableism, agoraphobia to a degree, xenophobia. I think all of those things are very much the antithesis of a lot of things that we find within trad witchery.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean,
maybe I'm drawing dualities where they don't need to be.
Yeah. One's a theme of like cutting people up and dividing them, and witchery is about connecting people and mingling and mixing.
Yeah, and mixing. The opposite of be still, you know?
Yeah, exactly. You know, a coven's almost like a cauldron, and each witch is an ingredient. Each witch and their retinue of spirits that follow them is an ingredient. So every coven's going to be, you know, a big mix of all kinds of wonderful things.
Yeah, that takes me back to our conversation about crowning, you know, because like in our coven, with our crowns through initiation, we have witches crowned in white or red or black. And with that come powers, which are innately within the witch anyway. You know, but it's interesting because sometimes these powers are powers that you might have been red, and then your crown is white and you're like, oh, okay. Or like you have been black, but you're given a white crown, you know? And I think there's an interesting way of looking at initiatory groups and group style ritual and magic. If you think of like people with these powers of crowns, of like, what would a coven look like where everyone is red? What would a coven look like where everyone is white? And I'm talking about the white goddess. I'm talking about Goda, who we refer to. Don't make that weird. Don't clip that in any kind of weird way, y'all. We're watching this, okay? Or what would a coven look like that is all black with Kolio, the Dark Mother? And then also like the covens that are kind of a mix. I don't think that like a coven necessarily having a perfect equal mixed ratio is the goal.
No.
Because the spirits decide. I do think that like a Goda crowned coven, like that feels very girly pop to me. I'm so here for that girly pop kind of moment. And I feel like a coven that is all crowned in black is like, I love a Molgoth. I love a trip pant. I'm also here for that too. And then all crowned in red, that's the Lima. No, I'm kidding.
Right. Yeah. We also talk about, you know, our spirits being crowned in the different courts as well. So like my fetch mate is crowned green with white as his secondary. And, you know, so that when I come into a space, the magic I'm working is tinged black and white and green and white, because that's the pairing that I have with my fetch mate. That's what we're kind of bringing to the table. You know, I look at someone else who might have, you know, they might be crowned glass or green, and their spirit that they're connected to might be white. And so when they're coming into a space, they're bringing that white-green combination to the mix. And so it creates really interesting uniqueness in covens. I think that the uniqueness is really kind of beautiful. Like the spirits are kind of, you can kind of almost think of it as like the spirits themselves are kind of working a spell by bringing all these different combinations of powers together through the living witches.
Well, and it's apotheosis in a way too, because I feel like we are like, our witch gods exist outside of us and they are their own sentient form, but we are also them, like incarnate in the midworld. We walk as them. So I think too, like when I think of the color green within the Spiral Castle tradition or within like our coven solar court more specifically, and I really use the terms like tradition and coven, like I would use denomination and church. That's the way that I kind of communicate that. So when I'm thinking tradition, I'm thinking American traditional folkloric witchcraft, which there could be many covens or what some people might call traditions like Spiral Castle, like Faerie, like Anderson, what have you, underneath that, right? And then coven, I know that, I think in a video I heard you talk about how you were, your background, you were raised Methodist, is that correct? Or am I
kind of vaguely agnostic, but I found a Methodist church really early that my grandparents were attached to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like if there's 6 different Methodist churches, I know in our city we have like 5 really big, gorgeous Methodist churches downtown Indianapolis. And so like they're all Methodist. And so similar to how you and I are talking right now, like they're probably going to have shared values, cosmology, maybe some terminology. Now, the individual churches or covens are probably going to have different focuses based off their worship team and like their clergy and who's running it. There's going to be also people there with different specialties. Like maybe at one Methodist church, there's someone who like really gets down with the get down on an instrument, and like they're really kind of known for that. Maybe there's another person at another worship team that has the spreadsheet down pat and the slideshows and what have you. And I think that the same can be said for like covens. Mm-hmm. Like we are working from similar traditions, mm-hmm. but have these different interpretations, even within our same tradition of like Solar Court, like Crossroads Coven, like Karashi, like Spiral Castle, or even just other like trad witch groups like the Clan of Tubal Cain or 1734 or Alexandrian, fill in the blank.
Yeah, yeah.
Blah, 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 blah. Like there's still those kind of similarities.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. Like I don't necessarily think witchcraft has to come from one living person to a next. Like, Victor clearly was initiated by Harpy Coven, but like, where did Harpy get it from?
Right.
It's my personal belief that they were a revival of a much more Luciferian group that existed before them. That was more like satanic spiritualism.
We have a Luciferian current throughout our threads too.
Yeah. But, witchcraft comes from the spirits directly. It is about mediating that communication from the spirit world. And so, all the fairy initiates in the world could die tomorrow. May it not be so, but could die tomorrow. The fairy tradition could potentially live on by spirits.
It would live on.
Contacting other living people in the future and being like, hey, start communicating with us. We're going to give you some stuff.
And there's books out there.
Yeah.
Like, even if they're no longer in print, they're still out there.
Yeah.
So even like esoteric, woo-woo, otherworld politics aside, mm-hmm. like it's now poured into the collective well of magic that when witches are tapping into that wellspring, like all of these traditions have fed this well, Mm-hmm.
We're all drawing from it. I mean, I think I knew a witch once who had a personal belief that someone like Isabel Gowdy gave her a confession so that people in the future would have clues about what to do.
I'm here for it.
Yeah. I'm like, that could be possible. That's a mythopoetic truth that I'm willing to hold on to.
And I think like earlier when we were talking about UPG, like that's some powerful personal gnosis that I think is really beneficial in the craft. Mm-hmm. And I think that right now, because there is this like discourse about UPG, there's a lot of people that are really shy or scared or nervous to talk about their own practiced, lived, real experiences or truths, like what you just talked about there, because there are people that come up and they're like, oh, well, that started in 1960, technically. And well, actually, and like, I think as witches, that's the point. I think that the only sort of caveat to that is like, there have been people, even some of our own witches of the past, not that long ago, who have absolutely intentionally wove a fabrication mm-hmm. of perception in order to have a certain amount of influence, right? Mm-hmm. And so like, I think that can be a little bit damning and damaging sometimes mm-hmm. to groups and to the well as a whole. Yeah. Like, you don't need to be the seventh son of a 13th generation psychic great grandma Cherokee princess witch.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. I often think back to the thing that Cochrane says in one of his letters of like, the way you know that someone's a witch, the spirits come when they call. That's it. Are the spirits coming? Are they collaborating with the living being? Well, then there you have your witch.
Mm-hmm. Chris says, I often feel as a solitary, I miss out on a lot. It's hard to find a group to work with, especially when you don't do anything normal. Well, I don't know what that is. No, I'm kidding. So this ties into a question I have for you too. Where can people learn more about Faerie?
I mean, Faerie is a hard thing to sort of come into contact with, because the old Faerie that I belong to now, we only teach people that we sort of feel that kinship with. And, you know, a lot of us employ little tricks like you got to ask us 3 times and be denied 3 times before we'll say yes. Or, you know, I only take a student who I met through happenstance, not someone who would reach out for me online. So we're kind of hard to get in contact with. There is a website, andersonfaerie.org. That's FAERY.org is how that's spelled in there. And you can reach out there and find people who are willing to teach folks. I only teach in person, and I only have 1 apprentice right now. And that's just kind of how I do things. But I do have like a YouTube channel that I'm going to be talking more about witchcraft in general on. I'm not wanting to tell people how to do witchcraft. I'm more about the frameworks you need to sort of bring to the table to make it start happening for you, because I'm very much someone who thinks that witchcraft happens to us as much as it's something that we do, that it's sort of the spirits sort of take the wheel and take us for a ride sometimes, and that they're ultimately the ones that we're collaborating with. So put out a call, ask the spirits themselves, like, if you're interested in this thing, how do I get in contact with someone who can plug me in?
And speaking of call too, like, you can weave together a witch's call. This is something that I've done before. You can craft a ritual and craft a spell to find your people. Like, you can call them to you, like a witch's call. And like, yeah, there's whole tea there. You need to put one together on your own that specifically works for your own framework, but calling upon like the brothers of the cloak and the sisters of the shade and like, have you a bonfire, pop a couple bottles, get your yiddies out. You know what I mean? Have a good time with it. Sure. Call to the witches of the past, the present, and the future. Speak with them as if they are sitting around the fire with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You have a deep desire, if you believe that you belong to witchcraft. And I very much frame it that way. Like, I belong to the craft. The craft does not belong to me. I am of service. If you have that desire burning inside of you, that is a little spark of the witch fire, and you can fan that flame and become a beacon, and it'll draw the people who you need to you. You'll be magnetized to one another.
Sorceress, I see your question. I did miss it. Okay. Sorceress asks, in passing, I would hear from time to time about people who are fae touched or people that has pixelated blood. Any thoughts on that, being a fairy initiate?
So I didn't go into it when we were talking about crowning, but there is this aspect to the being assigned to a court that touches on what some people might call otherkin.
We have that too.
It can be a little embarrassing to talk around, the ordinary folk.
But yeah. No, I know what you mean. We have that too, though. I heard you talk about that in a video.
Yeah. So like, around the dark of the moon every month, I have a serial dream where I am hunting something, and I am not in this body. I am in a monstrous body, and I am hunting something because my job is to feed the blood of whomever I kill to the land. I don't know if I'm actually killing people, and I don't know if it's just a dream, but to me, the experience is a religious experience that's profound. I am taking part in the game of fate, as it were. And there are other witches I know who experience themselves as fallen angels, and they have, anatomy that is etheric that they have to feed in certain ways. And that there are witches I know who experience themselves as fairy beings who have been born into human bodies this time around. My fetchmate and I trade off who's alive through every other life. So like when I die, he's going to take a human body, and I will become his familiar spirit through that lifetime. And when he dies, I take the human body, and he's my familiar spirit. And we sort of spin out, creating this interesting centripetal force that we're generating through lifetimes for a specific purpose. And it's just present in sort of within witch houses that you might be this other than human being as well as being human, because you're both. And you got to kind of come to terms with that. That's part of being something that straddles the hedge, is that you're both this other than human spirit and this human being, and you got to come to terms with it. It's not fun sometimes.
Yeah.
But it also has its boons. It definitely has its boons.
Yeah, we definitely have that as well. I have been involved with like the living vampire community, kind of in tandem with my witchdom. And there's a very interesting dynamic between vampires and witches, and sort of like the attitudes and the energy of how they feel about each other. And being in both of those spaces is interesting. But in terms of like the otherkin stuff, like I identify that also with sanguine vampirism or psi vampirism. And we have like with our crownings talking about witch blood, like witch blood is witch blood, that is witch blood, but there's also like the nymph blood or the blood of the fallen, like those are very, very common. There's like a black blood that I think is maybe a little less vocalized and like and published. I have a video on my channel specifically talking about witch blood, and another one specifically talking about Are Witches Born or Made, that are both video essays, Sorceress, that I kind of talk more about this in more detail. But like, for example, those of us crowned in white are like bathed or washed in the nymph blood, and those of us crowned in red would be bathed or washed in the blood of the fallen angels. And really, the red, the white, and the black all have correlations to these different realms. Like, they're in the midworld through us because we are them and they are us, as above, so below. Like, we're mirrored images of each other. But there's also the upper world that all three of our Trinity have a deep connection with through their different, talking about this great weaver of the cosmos where all things come from in this sort of cosmic cauldron. Or if we're talking about very Luciferian currents of like the fallen angel, and if we're talking about Cain as like witch father vibes, Lucifer as witch father vibes, Azazel as witch father vibes. And then if we're talking about like the Starfire princess, girly pop coded girly, like we have her too. Then we have our underworld, our other world, our upper world, our midworld. All of these are connected to all of those, but there's also like different associations there. So hopefully that answered your question, Sorceress. Regardless of whether or not we meet this goal on this live, I want to have you back here on the channel. I want you to know that. I would love to have you back again. I don't know what the topic is. We don't even maybe necessarily need to have a topic, because I feel like we could just turn it on and we could just go.
Yeah.
Have a great conversation. So this is your formal invitation. I will see you at the consummation of that red and green that you had mentioned. I'll be looking forward to watching that at the solstice. Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this. This was great.
All right, guys, thank you all for joining. We are going to wrap this up as we're a little over an hour. Thank you all for participating. Thank you all for asking questions and hanging out with us. And until next time, blessed be, and we will see you in hell. Bye.